I have been hated by them for a very long time. Yet, I endured it. Because I am a mother. I believe that a mother has the duty to protect her children until they are ready to leave the nest. Who is this?
Ha!
So, on the day Sebastian graduated from high school, I left my family. Because I had worked so hard. No matter how much they hated me, no matter how much they despised me, I kept telling myself that as a mother, as a wife, I had the duty to protect my child. But those days are over. I am now free from my family. Sebastian on the other end of the phone seems stunned. He must be wondering what to do, as this is the first time I have ever fought back after being on the receiving end for so long. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because we are no longer family. My name is Luna, a 45-year-old housewife. I live with my husband David and our eldest son Sebastian. Sebastian is 18 years old and is about to graduate from high school this year. Normally, this would be a cause for celebration, but I couldn't bring myself to be happy. The reason is Sebastian's attitude.
Hey, old hag, I can't find my shirt. Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you?
One day, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Sebastian spoke to me like that. I rummaged through the basket and found his shirt, then handed it to him. I'm sorry. Here you go. Then, as if to show his anger, Sebastian snatched it away forcefully.
You're really slow, aren't you? Can't you at least put my shirt in the closet while I'm sleeping? Don't make me go through the trouble of asking you, old hag.
I'm sorry. It was hanging outside until just now. Sebastian's words were sharp and pierced my heart. I could only apologize without arguing back. He seemed satisfied with my response.
If you make me angry again, I won't forgive you. Next time, I'll kick you out of the family.
With that, he returned to his room. Sebastian's attitude started to deteriorate 13 years ago. He was only 5 years old at the time. One day, he suddenly began calling me old hag. Even though I told him, "That's not a nice way to speak, let's correct it." His tone only worsened day by day. David said,
Sebastian is a boy, so it's just a phase. I went through it too.
When I consulted David, that's what he said. Indeed, I thought that boys might admire slightly bad characters from anime and start imitating their speech. So I decided to watch over Sebastian's growth, occasionally cautioning him but not forcing him to change. However, as a result, Sebastian's attitude only got worse day by day. Before I knew it, calling me old hag instead of mom became normal, and he hurled insults at me more often than he said thank you. We could no longer have a proper conversation as a family. Time passed, and now Sebastian is 18 years old. I found out about his plans to attend university after high school by eavesdropping on a conversation between Sebastian and David 3 days ago. He didn't consult me at all about his future plans. But even so, Sebastian seemed to rely only on David. Sebastian and David have always been close, and I often saw them going out together. Perhaps it's easier for them to bond as men. I also wanted to be treated as family by Sebastian. I wanted to live as a family. Not being able to do that weighed heavily on my heart and was unbearably painful. It wasn't just Sebastian who treated me poorly. David also came to dislike me. David said,
You really are clumsy. Look, there's dust accumulating over there. Can't you at least clean properly? You're a housewife, aren't you?
Since Sebastian's attitude started to worsen 13 years ago, David also began to change his attitude towards me. Of course, for the worse. David said,
You're clumsy.
David said,
You can't even do the job of a housewife.
Whenever I failed to do even one thing, he would hurl harsh words at me. Originally, after we got married, we divided the household chores between us. David said,
Just because you're a housewife doesn't mean you have to do all the chores.
That's what David told me. After Sebastian was born, I realized how hard raising a child was. Things didn't go as planned most of the time, and I felt terribly depressed each time. At first, David was actively involved in raising our child, but gradually, he stopped intervening in child-rearing, and eventually, he even stopped doing household chores. When I consulted him, he would listen, but it always ended with, "You're not trying hard enough." So, consulting David never cleared the fog in my heart.
You can't even clean properly. No matter how many years pass, you never grow as a wife. Do you have no learning ability?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll try harder, so please forgive me.
You get scolded because you can't do it even when you try. You keep saying you'll try harder, but nothing ever improves.
David's words weighed heavily on my heart. It was already a huge stress not being able to get along with Sebastian, but realizing that even David disliked me and didn't see me as a wife or family made me feel like collapsing on the spot. I endured it for 13 years. No matter how close I came to breaking, I was a mother and a wife. I kept pushing myself, telling my heart that was screaming, "I'm at my limit." That I had to do what needed to be done. Even when I was too exhausted to move, I forced myself to get up and keep going. If I didn't, I would have become completely incapable of doing anything. And if I became incapable of doing anything, I feared that David and Sebastian would no longer need me. As time passed, the day of Sebastian's high school graduation ceremony approached. However, I only found out the date 3 days before the ceremony. One day, while I was doing housework, David asked me,
By the way, where did we put the suit for the ceremony?
"The graduation ceremony is coming up, isn't it? But I don't know the date yet. Has it not been announced?"
I see. You didn't hear it from Sebastian.
David said this with a look of pity in his eyes. David had heard the date from Sebastian a week earlier. Once again, I was left out. It was painful to realize this, but it had been a daily occurrence for the past 13 years, so I had no choice but to accept it. Still, I couldn't recover well and kept my head down. Then, Sebastian, who had no school that day, came out of his room.
Hey, old hag. What's with this atmosphere? Don't spread your gloominess to Dad.
Sebastian glared at me as he said this. But it was Sebastian's fault that the atmosphere was like this in the first place. If he had just told me the date of the graduation ceremony, this wouldn't have happened. The graduation ceremony is in 3 days, right? It seems you didn't tell me. I asked, feeling accusatory, and Sebastian let out a big sigh as if to say, "What a hassle."
So what? You're not coming to the graduation ceremony anyway, so you don't need to know the date.
I couldn't help but tilt my head in confusion. Why? I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation ceremony. When I asked this, Sebastian replied,
No! Don't come. If an old hag like you shows up, everyone will laugh at me. I can't stand having my big day ruined.
Those words made me dizzy. Indeed, Sebastian had never invited me to his entrance or graduation ceremonies before. But if I knew the date, I always attended and celebrated Sebastian's milestones from the bottom of my heart. Even if I wasn't treated as family, I had always done that. But this time, I wasn't even allowed to attend the graduation ceremony. Sebastian's words, "Don't come," pierced my heart. Sebastian clearly told me that I was nothing but a nuisance. The words were so shocking that I gasped. At that moment, I realized that my heart had reached its limit long ago. So, I decided to end my role as a family member. The day of Sebastian's high school graduation ceremony eventually arrived. It seemed that David had been asked by Sebastian to attend, so they both left the house in their suits. I was left behind. In the past, I would have been disheartened by this fact but unable to do anything, ending up crying myself to sleep. But those days ended today. As soon as they left the house, I packed my things and left. I headed to my parents' house. I was convinced that I could no longer live as a family with Sebastian and David, so I decided to rest at my parents' house while preparing to sever ties with them. I left a note at the house. It said that I was considering a divorce, that I wanted to cut ties as a family and live alone, and that they should discuss the details through a lawyer. Finding a reliable lawyer within 3 days was really tough. There were many other things I had to do. One of them was preparing to sell the house. The house we lived in was actually one I inherited from my father. My father was a well-known wealthy man in a certain industry and owned several properties as vacation homes. When we got married, my father gave us one of those vacation homes as a wedding gift. In other words, the owner of that house was my father, not me or David. Moreover, my father had given me the house out of consideration for me, so when he learned that I was driven to this point, he quickly decided to sell it.
Then we don't need that house.
I also wrote in the note that the house would be sold, so they should take their necessary belongings and leave within a week.
That's considerate.
My father said that about me, but I couldn't bear it if they later claimed they hadn't heard about it. For the time being, I decided to stay at my parents' house, cut ties with my family, look for a new job and home, and heal the wounds inflicted by my family. Honestly, it took a lot of courage to do all this.
How dare they treat my daughter like that?
It was because my father, upon hearing my story, got so angry that his face turned red that I was able to take this step. I realized once again how great my father was. After a busy day, I was relaxing in my room when my phone rang loudly, indicating an incoming call. I had a good idea who it was from, but just to be sure, I checked and saw the name Sebastian. As expected, he was contacting me about my disappearance and the note I left. Honestly, I didn't want to talk to him anymore. After all, for about 13 years, Sebastian had never called me Mom. He always called me Old Hag. He never treated me as family. I wasn't kind-hearted enough to deal with Sebastian now. Still, I had to settle the past. If I kept running away, I would live the rest of my life without feeling at peace. After being treated so poorly, I had to get my revenge.
Hey! Old hag, where are you? Do you think you can get away with leaving such a ridiculous note? Where are you? Come home right now.
When I answered the phone, Sebastian shouted without even a greeting. His voice was tinged with panic, and he seemed to be in a state of distress. Well, it's no wonder. After all, when he returned from the graduation ceremony, the woman he had been calling Old Hag was gone, and the note left behind said that the house would be sold and other terrible things. Having his big day ruined, Sebastian must have been very upset. I couldn't help but chuckle at Sebastian's panic, but he was too busy yelling on the other end of the line to notice. To such a Sebastian, I replied, Who is this?"
Ha!
Sebastian seemed unable to understand my words. But soon after, he started chuckling.
What a poor act. Are you trying to trick me? Sorry, but I don't think a clumsy old hag like you can pull it off. Stop putting on a pointless front, you trash who can't even live without relying on family.
His words were so infuriating, but I also noticed that his voice was slightly trembling. Despite what he was saying, Sebastian was clearly not at ease. He was insulting me, throwing harsh words at me, trying to make me anxious and bring me back. I understood this immediately, so I decided to respond to him as calmly as possible. I don't have a family. Oh, I have my parents and brother, but you are not my family, right?
What are you talking about? Dad and I are your family, aren't we? Have you lost your mind?
As I said, I don't have a family. No matter what Sebastian said, I continued to treat him as a stranger. Sebastian and David are not my family. Because if they were, they wouldn't have treated me the way they did. Family is supposed to support and help each other. When a family member is in trouble, it's the family's role to support them. Sebastian and David neglected that. They disregarded me as a family member for 13 years and continued to make twisted claims that it was only natural. I often think to myself how I managed to endure for 13 years. But that was out of a sense of duty because I gave birth to Sebastian. Even if I wasn't treated as family, the fact that I gave birth to Sebastian didn't change. Being his biological mother was an unshakable fact. So, I decided to wait until he graduated from high school. I kept telling myself that once he graduated and left the nest, it would be the right time for me to cut ties with him. Honestly, I had a faint hope that if Sebastian changed his attitude towards me by the time of his graduation, I could abandon this idea and continue as a family. But Sebastian didn't meet that expectation. Remembering his attitude 3 days before the graduation ceremony made that clear. So, I thought it was only fair for me to take the appropriate action. Sebastian is no longer my family. Therefore, I have no obligation to treat him as such. As I continued to treat him as a stranger, Sebastian finally seemed to understand my intentions and spoke again.
Stop this boring act already. We are family, aren't we? We are blood-related parent and child. So please, listen to me. What was that note about? Are you really going to sell the house? You can't be serious, right? Because you are our family.
I am not your family.
No way.
It seemed he was worried about the house being sold. But I was serious about that note I left. Even if Sebastian begged me, I had no intention of changing my mind.
Please, tell me you're joking. If that house is gone, where will we live? I didn't even know it belonged to Grandpa. I thought it was Dad's.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, but please don't call me again. I maintained a cold attitude. No matter how much he begged, I wouldn't spoil him anymore. As I continued to pretend to be a stranger with that resolve, Sebastian, seemingly at his limit, called out to David.
Wait a minute. I'll let Dad talk to you.
After a while, David spoke to me over the phone.
Hey! Luna! Where are you? Leaving a note like that? Come back immediately!
David's voice was filled with anger. He must have been furious about what I did. As I remained silent, David continued.
Stop with the disrespectful attitude. Do you think you can get away with doing this to your family?
David spoke rapidly, and I could hear Sebastian's voice in the background.
Dad, tell her more.
The two of them seemed angrier than I had imagined. But that no longer mattered to me. Because I was no longer family. Enough. I told you, we're not family. After 13 years of not treating me as family, it's impossible to suddenly act like one now. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I couldn't forgive their selfish actions. I had tried to become a family with them. But for 13 years, they never treated me as family. I was always the outsider. It was so lonely and painful. How many times had I wished to be treated as family? That wish never came true, but I couldn't easily give up. I endured it for 13 years. I kept trying to make it work as a family, to be Sebastian's mother. And this is the result. I let out a dry laugh at the pathetic outcome. They never respected my feelings. They never accepted them. No matter how much I thought about them, they never thought about me. No matter how much I cherished them, they never cherished me. Yet, when things became inconvenient for them, they tried to bring me back by saying things they didn't mean, like, because we're family. The convenience of it all made me feel nauseous. Why did I endure for 13 years for people like this? Even if I felt a sense of responsibility as a mother, it shouldn't justify being treated so poorly. I even regret not being kinder to myself. If I had been kinder to myself, would the outcome have been different? Maybe there was a future where I could have understood Sebastian and David and lived happily as a family. But that's just a maybe, and there's no way that future can exist for us now. Because I can no longer expect anything from Sebastian or David. I can't trust them. Even if they begged me now to be a family, I would never take their hands or think about trying to make it work together. Enough. I'm no longer your family. I'm a stranger to you. After treating me like a stranger for 13 years, what now? Come back because we're family? Talk it out? Did you think I'd say yes? How optimistic. There's no way that's happening. The words came out in a rush. Words I couldn't have said before, fearing conflict. They poured out uncontrollably. I don't want to hear excuses. I can't trust anything you say anymore. I can't imagine going on as a family. Just sign the divorce papers. If you don't want to submit them, I'll do it myself. And get out of the house quickly. You won't inconvenience others, will you?
But
Stop making excuses and get ready. You're being pathetic. Goodbye. I spoke rapidly, saying whatever came to mind. Even when David tried to speak, I cut him off. I didn't want to hear anything from David or Sebastian anymore. After saying everything I wanted, I hung up the phone in a rush.
wait!
David said that, but I ignored him. After that, David and Sebastian called many times, but I didn't answer and blocked their calls. When they started calling my parents' house, I got their permission to block those calls too. Finally, I was able to cut ties with the family that had made my life miserable for 13 years. Even though they tried to contact me through friends, I kept hiding from them. Eventually, the divorce with David was finalized. David resisted, saying he didn't want a divorce, but when it went to mediation, he realized it was futile and signed the papers. Since the house belonged to my father, it was sold, and they had to move out. According to a friend, after the incident with me, David and Sebastian started fighting constantly. David couldn't manage the finances and fell behind on Sebastian's tuition, causing Sebastian to give up his hard-earned path. As a result, Sebastian quit school and started working, while David, shocked by his own actions, quit his job and became a recluse in a shabby apartment with Sebastian. They are still looking for me, but I have no intention of ever seeing them again. As for me, I found a job and moved out of my parents' house. Thanks to my experience as an office worker before marriage, I was able to adapt well to my new workplace. Soon after, I found a new home and thanked my parents for all their support before moving out. It's an apartment not far from my parents' house. In my new home, I'm living happily now. Honestly, I have no good memories of family, so I don't need anyone I can call family for a while. In this day and age, I can live well enough on my own, so I plan to live leisurely by myself for now.
How did you like this story? Please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.